Welcome to Heartbreak to Healed podcast. I'm your host, Jamie Baptiste from Rejected Hearts Club.
And I'm your host, Sophie Delcour with Healing Soul Spiritual Center.
And we do the heartbreaks
so you can heal.
We have somebody amazing that's going to come up on our show today. And this is somebody that I have literally known since I feel like 4 years old. In Maryland, we grew up together. She's pretty much family. I have watched this girl go through so many things in her life and how she has bounced back. I have no idea how, and she keeps it positive. She keeps a smile on her face each day. She's an amazing mother, and I'm excited for her to share her story with you guys. And with that being said, we are going to have Nunu.
Hi.
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 Thank you for joining us today.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you. I'm super excited to be on your show. Love you guys.
Love you too. So let's just get right into it. First of all, when was your last breakup?
My last breakup, I would probably my divorce 2 years ago.
Oh, wow. So do you want to kind of give us how you gave your heart away, then your heart was rejected, and the heart that you gave to yourself? How did that process happen?
Breakups in general, we all know they suck. Going through a divorce, and to be completely transparent with you guys, Sophie, you may not know this, but this is actually my second divorce. I first got married really young. We were too young. Didn't work out. Then I got married once I was 30 years old. And our marriage lasted almost a decade.
It's crazy.
Then it began to fall apart. It wasn't anything like any cheating scandals or anything like that. It was just two people that we just couldn't get it right. I mean, we tried counseling, we tried everything. And sometimes that just happens in a relationship. It's not always a dramatic explosion or ending, but either way, it still breaks your soul when you lose that person you love, Since divorcing him, I've dated. That dating world right now is, let me tell you ladies, if you have a good man,
keep him.
Be good to him, keep him.
The dating world, I cannot imagine these days with so much technology, so much people trying to scam and con, being a working mom, just trying to be yourself. And we'll talk about how that's been working out for you down the line.
Yeah.
But
so that was my last breakup. And it's funny, Jamie, you said something that my friends say, like, you bounce back and you're so positive, and I am, but that's not to say, we all know, like you said, Sophie, when you're healing, you still go through that grief, that strife, that pain, it's tough. And I'm one of those people, I try to bottle things in and just go out to the world and appear happy and I'm good. But, inside you're like slowly breaking down. And that divorce was, any divorce, any breakup is going to break you. You know what I mean? So it's a journey. I think what's kept me positive, because even people now ask me, do you want to get married? I'm like, you know what? Yeah, I'd get married again. I'm hopeful. Because there are tons of good people out there. If I'm a good person, I know there's someone out there.
There is.
And the important thing is having that support system, like friends, like you, Jamie, you know what I mean? Seeing me go through it, having you to be able to reach out to, even that we're different time zones away. Having that support system is vital. Yes, it definitely is to any breakup or divorce. I think that and my faith is what's kept me going, whatever religion you are, whatever you pray to, your faith, that's very important also aspect in your life to continue to keep going and keep pushing in those days when you just feel like you cannot make it, like you can't get out of bed,
Some of those days of when you feel like you can't get out of bed, things like that, what were you saying to yourself mentally, or how did you basically say one day, you know what, I need to get up and get myself together? What was that one key where it's like, I've given myself X amount of time to kind of like be broken?
I would tell myself, Nunu, you got this. You got this. Keep going. People need you. Your family needs you. Your kids need you. Your job needs you. And it's not easy, you know what I mean? Like you said, but it's just all I kept telling myself was, you got this. let it go, which is not an easy thing to say, but
Mhm.
and it might seem a little like a little harsh, but you do have to learn to let things go in order to continue to move forward, you
I
know.
agree. I feel like Sophie said that in our last episode as well, just based on things that she experienced in her life. I believe with 3 divorces, which is crazy.
Mhm.
So that kind of ties into that as well. Would you agree,
Mhm.
Sophie?
Yeah, yeah. And it is very difficult because it is a proper balance of allowing yourself to feel those feelings while letting go. Because it's never like a perfect process, right?
Right.
Um, and also being able to find that balance with that in mind, because you don't want to let go in a way that you are neglecting how you feel.
Mhm.
You're distracting yourself instead, because then you never do heal. All you do
Right.
is just, barrel forward in life
Right.
essentially, and then you keep it bottled up, which is, really terrible. And that's how stuff can manifest physically and
Mhm.
Mhm.
make life harder, and so um, my question would be then, what did you do to allow yourself to move forward and heal without causing that issue within yourself of just being distracted?
Mhm.
I had to forgive myself and give myself grace. I think we are our own worst critic, and we will tear ourselves apart, pick ourselves apart. And I had to get to a point where I was like, you know what? It's not your fault. It takes two
Right.
to tango. You both tried, it didn't work. You know, give yourself that grace. And
Mhm.
we need to be a little more kind to each other, because I realize in life, we're so big on, oh, be kind to others, but we're not that kind to ourselves. And that little voice and how we speak to ourselves makes a huge difference. And again, by no means am I perfect, because there were times where I was putting myself down. But in
Mhm.
answer to your question, Sophie, it was to give myself grace and forgive myself. And that doesn't necessarily mean I did anything wrong, but
Mhm.
to learn to be kind to yourself so we can move forward and not be so hold on to that, those grudges and those that pain that just makes people
Mhm.
miserable, because it will be you will become bitter. You will
And
become
with that
bitter.
being said, when you do hang on to that, then like you are saying, I agree, you become bitter, you become angry, and that ends up manifesting within yourself and in your body and things like
Yeah.
that. And that's not healthy. So, yes, it's hard to kind of one quote unquote get over what happened in your relationship. But if you don't heal yourself, you are not going to move forward and you're not going to be able to be good for, in your example, for your kids, for your family, whatever. It has to start with you because you are the foundation.
Right. And what was the hardest part for me? And I'm gonna ask you guys this question, but for me, I've noticed with breakups, it's more difficult for me at night. And I know it sounds a little bizarre, but let me explain out. And I want to know if you guys went through this or feel what I'm saying.
Mhm.
During the day, like Sophie, you said, we're so distracted with work, with kids, friends, whatever, right? But then
Mhm.
when the night falls and it's time to go to bed and it gets quiet, that silence is loud. And that used to drive me crazy, because then your mind just starts going and going and going. And you start reliving every little moment. And that for me was very difficult to get through those nights. I mean, was that like that for you guys, or am I going crazy? But
I mean, Sophie, do you want to take it first? Because
Yeah. So I've I've struggled with that for years, and really that is um, worry and anxiety coming through.
Mhm.
That is you processing feelings in a moment where you have no choice but to sit with yourself. I think that's honestly the hardest the hardest thing anybody can do is sit with themselves.
Goodness,
And
yes.
it's because now you couple that with all the anxiety, the worry, the stress of what's been going on, and you don't have a distraction, especially as it gets later and later, because you can't
Hmm.
even text or call anybody to
Right.
try to calm yourself, but still, even that is a reach for a distraction, which can be
Mhm.
good in moments if it's getting overwhelming, the emotions are too high and you need to get help with getting that balance. That's where that's important. But I think a lot of us fail to understand that those hard moments are exactly where the healing happens,
Hmm.
but only if you allow it to actually be that way. Mind you, that took me a long time to understand that too. So this is not something that people just know how to do. It's not something that you come into this world just knowing. And half the time you're never taught it because we live in a culture of anxiety. This is
Mm-hmm.
normal. You'd rather find camaraderie around nighttime anxiety and not being able to sleep and how tired you are the next day. Think about like small talk conversations in the office.
Right.
That it then perpetuates it without even you realizing it, even though those are the moments. That's where the
Mm-hmm.
healing happens, when you have to sit with yourself and deal with those emotions. That's where you find forgiveness. That's where you have to basically hit your emotional rock bottom to move forward.
So something you mentioned, basically sitting with your thoughts at night, and it's like you have nobody to contact, or you do have somebody. But even in those moments, I don't know if you felt like this, Nuka, is when you're sitting in the dark and you have your phone, and it's like, this is the person that I was so used to telling everything to. So when we're
Yeah.
in those moments and those dark times, it's like, that's the person that I want to text, but you're going back and forth where it's like, I can't text them, or you do text them and you end up in the same situation or a lot worse because you don't get the response that you wanted, or the tone's very different from what you're used to. So that's another thing, again, how I reach the never date kind of vibe. But sitting in your own thoughts literally sometimes can be your worst enemy, but you have to get through it, unfortunately. But once you look back, once you've moved on, and it's like, oh my God, like, what was I thinking? Like, I'm totally fine. So
Right.
nighttime, yes, it can be the worst because you're only sitting with your own thoughts, for sure.
Yep. Yeah.
So you guys ended up also having a child together. So with that
Yes, we
being
did.
said, how did that work when you guys were communicating to make the decision to cut ties? And how did you guys learn how you can basically be the best parents for this child?
So that's the difficult part, because
Mm-hmm.
when I decided that I wanted out of the marriage, and we talked about it, my first thing was, how's my son going to be? How's this going to affect him? My son does have special needs, so he
Mm-hmm.
processes things a little differently. And now he's 7. He was like 4 then, I think 4 or 5.
Yeah.
Um, so here we are thinking, okay, we're going to divorce, but what's going to happen? Their son's going to have now 2 households instead of 1.
Mm-hmm.
Mind you, this was all happening during COVID, so he
Oh,
couldn't
wow.
he could he couldn't move out right away, because apartments were not taking people in that fast. It was just a disaster, right? But we had to both think logically, like, even though we're hurting right now, that we're going through this, we need to do right by our son.
Mm-hmm.
um and he's a very hands-on father, so he was like, I want half 50-50 custody. I'm like, absolutely, that's your son. Only how to raise a boy. I can't raise a boy. I could raise a girl and teach her how to be a woman, but I can't teach a boy how to be a man. But it was those difficult conversations when you're stuck in the house during COVID, when you're going through a
Mm-hmm.
divorce, that you have to have, which might have, hindsight looking back, it might have been the best thing, because it forced us to sit down and have
Oh,
that conversation.
wow. Were you guys also discussing like the whys behind your divorce? Or were you guys thinking you guys could make it work?
We had already by that point had tried counseling. I'll never forget when I said I wanted the divorce. I was so overwhelmed that day. And I remember I was in the kitchen table, and I don't know what happened, but something triggered it. And I was like, oh my God, I think we just need to get a divorce. And that slipped out of my
Wow.
mouth. And I know he looked at me, and nothing was said afterwards. And it wasn't until like the next day, we kind of didn't really speak much after that. It was very
Mm-hmm.
awkward. But he's one of them people, he's very to the point, very organized. So then it must have been on his mind, obviously. The next
Mm-hmm.
day, he's like, we need to sit down and have a talk. You blurted this out, you know, now what? Now we need to move forward. And so I remember we'd be at the little dinner table talking while my son was taking a nap, or he was downstairs playing. It it was, I don't want to say awkward, but it was such a difficult situation being on lockdown. So it's not like I could go to my friend's house and be like, I
Right.
need to talk to you. I mean, I relied heavily on phone and FaceTime. That's why I said your support system is big, because that was such a, and I know I'm not the only one who went through that, during the pandemic. Many other
Mm-hmm.
people separated or had issues. And we can all say that it's a difficult situation to be in when the whole world is going through this pandemic that,
Turmoil.
yes, exactly. So it was conversations that had to be had, and they were tough, but I'm so glad he's the type of person he is, because he kind of not forced me, but he sat me down like, we need to talk this out. We need to get this
Good.
figured out for our son, you know. And I have no ill will towards my ex-husband. We did not work out. He was not the man I needed him to be. I'm pretty sure I was not the woman he needed me to be,
Hmm.
but he's an excellent father.
That's
And
great. Do you
yeah, and
think, I
we,
know a lot of relationships can kind of change once you have kids. So, in hindsight, if you guys didn't have a child together, do you think your marriage would be in the same end result or something would have been different?
Jamie, that is such a good question, because I've thought about that myself.
Hmm.
It's so difficult to think about, because I think it's still, I mean, yes, children will change the dynamic of a marriage. It doesn't matter. It just happens. That changes the dynamic of any relationship.
Hmm.
You know, he had a kid prior to coming into the relationship. I had a kid prior. So we both had that experience of parenting with someone else.
Hmm.
And then here we are together, and we bring a beautiful boy to the world. I do believe that the marriage still would have ended. Looking back on certain things, we loved each other, but I think we're just two people that can't be together.
Hmm.
It's he's not a bad person. He's just not good for me at all.
Hmm.
And I don't say that as a disrespect to him. You know what I mean? It's just there's something about us that we couldn't make it work. So I definitely think the marriage would have eventually resolved the way it
It
did.
did.
Yeah.
So I know Sophie and I were talking last week about kind of red flags and things like that. So Sophie, what do you think in situations like this, especially with, because you've gone through, everybody that you married had children, correct, Sophie?
Yes, and actually, one of those I didn't actually marry. It was a broken proposal, is what I did. So,
Oh, we'll have to
yeah,
get into that.
Yeah.
yeah.
Um, so do you
Yeah.
both think that in hindsight, especially with children, were there red flags prior to either having children or prior to even dating somebody with kids? Were there red flags looking back that's like, oh my God, I should have seen that?
Do you want to answer that first, Sophie?
Absolutely. So, one thing that I have definitely learned through my own stuff and watching others is that,
Mhm.
yes, kids absolutely change the dynamic of what happens. And to put it very, very bluntly, it's a perfect distraction for problems. The
Oh,
red flags
wow.
are there. Yes. Well, think about it. You've got children involved, and you're both going to love them. And the care and love for that child is going to outweigh anything that's going on. So you're going to let red flags slide. You're going to let problems slide. You're going to let a lot of stuff slide because it means it impacts the child. You don't want to
Hmm.
hurt your child, stepchild, or biological child. It doesn't matter. They're just kids, you
Hmm.
know? They need love. They need to be raised. They need to be taught, all that stuff. And it takes a lot of work.
Yes, it
So,
does.
so really, it's delaying the inevitable when it comes to the dynamic between the two adults.
Hmm.
And, because having kids it will definitely change a person, but that doesn't change your energy. It doesn't change whether or not two people are compatible. It
Right.
just changes the fact of whether or not there's a child in need in the picture.
Very
That's it.
true.
That's it.
I
So absolutely, and it made it harder to deal with the divorces, the breakups, that I went through that did involve kids, because especially at the time that I was dealing with all of that, that the dad wasn't that great. Each of them let
Mhm.
me take on the primary role on my end, which was a lot of stress.
Mhm.
But I wasn't not going to do it. I loved the kids, and they needed it. I'm not going to let a kid down. Mm-mm. So when it came to having to suddenly deal with either that engagement break off or the divorce. Um, it was just, it did make it hard, but it still happened.
Understandably so.
It
I
still
feel like
happened.
it's harder with kids in general, like breaking up, divorce, whatever. Anybody that has kids, they all know like that relationship's going to be harder with a child in the mix because oh my gosh, other responsibilities come with that. So even in
Yeah.
my relationship now, in my marriage, we always talk and kind of laugh. I'm like, babe, we don't have any arguments until it's about parenting. And it's just a completely different dynamic versus when you're just dating without kids versus when you add another human being in the mix. So, what about you, Nanuka?
As far as red flags, when it came to the kids, one of the reasons that I had fell in love with him because I saw how much of a good dad he was towards his daughter,
Mm-hmm.
and I was like, wow, this is a really good dad, a really good guy. But in some ways, I think that may have also been like a red flag because that's not the only reason I married him, obviously.
Right.
Uh, but it's like certain things. I think when you fall in love, like you see everything so beautifully and so perfect, and you don't think, well, wait a second, there's this little piece there that is great, but because like he was really good to his daughter, and he
Mm-hmm.
accepted my daughter, but there were times when as my daughter got older, and kids, you go through that teen phase where you just want to strangle them,
Mm-hmm.
and lock them outside a little bit.
Just a little bit.
but
Yeah.
but I felt like but it seemed like he took it more for lack of better words, personal. Like when my daughter would do things that I'm like, oh Lord, here we go. He would get more angry at the fact, and I don't know if it was maybe because he felt that I wasn't um reacting in a way that he felt might have been more appropriate versus because I'm more of a lenient parent. I will say my kids,
Mm-hmm.
they had me wrapped around the little fingers. I will admit that I'm more of a softie at times, and that would irritate him. And that's with any household. Everyone has different parenting
Yes.
styles. But the
Yes.
reason I say why it's not a red flag, but it is because you don't think about that. You say, oh, he's such a good parent to his kid, but you don't think, wow, once we come together and join this family, this blended family, shit changes. I mean, blended
Very
families
much
are
so.
tough. They are tough. So that's the only thing that I'm like, and again, I don't like to call it a red flag, but I don't know what else to call it. It's like I was so enamored by the whole him of being a good dad that I didn't think, well, what's going to happen? We join our families.
Well, I
I'm
think
thinking it's
it's
going
a
to be one big
case
happy
of
family.
exactly. I think the case of what you said is everybody has different parenting styles. And so even in my household, there's two completely dynamics as far as parenting styles where I'm going to be more dominant versus my
Mm-hmm.
husband's more like you, Nunu, where it's
Mm-hmm.
like lenient. And then
Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of more like your ex, where I'm like, well, why isn't he reacting a certain way? But I can't put
Right.
expectations on my husband to react the same way I would. So it's
Right.
trying to find that balance. And I feel like if you can't find that, then unfortunately that's when divorces do happen with children because you can't get on that same page in parenting.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, blended families are definitely a whole beast. I mean, it's definitely it's difficult, and I say that with love because yes, and let me tell you something. I loved my stepdaughter. Like I
Of course.
adored her. It's just having two different kids, complete different kids into one household, two different people in one household. Then we bring our own kid together. It's a lot. It's definitely a lot. And that's why I said before, I think the marriage would have ended anyways before we brought our son in because we're raising two girls. And again, we
That's
just
hard in
cannot,
itself.
yeah, we cannot get it together and agree on certain things. There's something that could have been fixed. 'Cause like I said, our marriage didn't end on, oh, you cheated, you did this, you beat me. No, it ended on, something that most people will be like, oh, well, that you guys could have worked it out, but we tried. We really tried,
Mhm.
And honestly, I couldn't do it anymore. It's to a point where I felt like I was walking on eggshells, and that's no way to
Wow.
live your life. You know what I mean? If you can't
No.
be comfortable in your own home, uh, shit ain't right, and you
Yeah.
gotta acknowledge that and say the best for our children is for us to break up and
Mhm.
go separate ways versus stay in a house, because who knows what would have happened had I stayed. I could have blown
Correct.
up and just, been a horrible wife, horrible mom, always pissed off, yelling. I don't want to be that way, and then that's
Mhm.
not me anyways.
Mhm.
So yeah,
So something,
definitely.
Sophie, you and I talked about last week, where I asked a question of why do we hold on to guilt after breakups, where it is that thought of blaming yourself. Could I have done this? Could I have done that? But what Nunu said earlier, it's just finding that balance of knowing it's not your fault. So how do we let go of that guilt after heartbreak?
Well, you have to recognize the situation for what it is first and foremost. The reality behind it. How do you feel about it? And sometimes, yes, as terrible as this might sound to some, divorce is the best way. And
Mm-hmm.
the reason why is that, you know, you can feel and sense when there's an issue in the house. That means your kids can feel it. That's
Mm-hmm.
what they're learning. That tension all of a sudden, that stress, they're now living in it. So you have to be able to recognize that as well and accept that. Is that the environment that you're actually wanting to put your kid in? And a lot of people struggle with that because they're dead set on the idea that mom and dad should be together. That's the
Right.
healthiest, right? And
Right.
and there are certain regards, absolutely. If you were to ask probably any kid, would you have preferred if mom and dad stayed together? And they're going to tell you, yeah, but they're going to tell you yes based on the rainbows and butterflies. Remember that they're seeing it because that's how we naturally think. We want to see the good in it and the happy parts and all of that. But, they're not old enough even to understand that if they would have, that
Mm-hmm.
it would have been bad for them. So, as an adult, when you recognize that, that is the first thing. And secondly, it's just like what Nunu had to do, which was forgive yourself. The reason why that's so important, by the way, even if you're dead set consciously on the surface that you're doing the right thing, you live in a society that has a certain kind of culture
Yep.
where we
Mm-hmm.
think that this needs to be that way, that needs to be this way, blah, 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 because we have roles to play, we have things to do. Socially, this is important. And even as grown adults, it completely affects us, just like if we were kids, just a
Yeah.
different dynamic for different reasons, is all.
Yeah.
So you have to recognize that these are going to be pressures that you're putting on yourself because you were taught a certain way. And it all goes back to from the beginning. What did you see with your parents? What did you see with your teachers? What did you see with your friends' parents? What did you see when you finally got to work and had adult friends and all of that in your younger years? Because there's a first time for that too when you break into the world. So that is why forgiving yourself is actually still very important, because you will always still sum yourself up against the culture in which you're living in and the
Yeah.
expectations of others. And you have to be prepared also to be able to talk out loud, because it is pretty much impossible for anybody to just not talk about their private situations, you know, because it affects everything. So, for us as grown-ups, going to work, you're going through some stuff. People are going to ask.
Mm-hmm.
You get to being friends with people that are at work. Well, now guess what? That means you're going to have to listen to what they have to say, which is going to be culturally based.
Mm-hmm.
And then whatever spin that they put on it because of their own experiences. Now,
So,
if you,
with kind of how you're saying with being culturally based in our foundation, bringing it back to you, Nunu, is do you think that you've carried anything between your parents and what you've brought into your relationships?
I mean, absolutely. How we grow up definitely impacts how we are.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that's also helped me that I should have mentioned early on, that a lot of people, society doesn't like to tap on too much, is I've also sought out therapy for myself,
That's
and I see a
great.
therapist. And especially in the Black and Brown community, that's something that's not always accepted. It's not like, you know what I mean? It's always like, oh, you don't need that. You just crazy then if you
Mm-hmm.
talk to a therapist. But no, that's also how I've been able to bounce back from these divorces and breakups, is to not just heal myself and work on myself, but do that through another party, a therapist, to help me out.
Good
Um,
job.
Mhm.
so, well, hey, I'm a work in progress. Nobody's
Hey,
perfect, right?
we're all that way for sure.
Yep.
Well, then I guess kind of like moving this on a little bit, the last thing that I wanted to touch on with you is just because I know your story, how did it feel? Can you talk about your first person, I'll say, that you had a child with, and then unfortunately recently he passed away. So how was that basically processing that, knowing that you guys had a child together, and things like that?
Jamie, that has been so difficult. You knew him too. You know what
I
I mean?
know.
We all hung out together. Him and I had my daughter when I was 19. We were young. We were in love, then we broke up, and we did not have the best co-parenting relationship, and that was just because we were both young, listening
Hmm.
to our families, listening to friends. So I take full responsibility in that, and I'm not gonna shit on him either because he's not here to defend himself, but
Right.
he really did love my daughter despite all the differences him and I had. I think that's why we fought so much over her, because we both loved her so much.
Wow.
But him passing away so sudden, it's only been a year, that broke my soul. Even though we were not together, he had already moved on, had a wife, had more children. Um, I've never told anyone this, and I'm about to tell you guys this, but he's the only man that really knew me. The
Wow.
only man that I've dated, from the guys I've dated and married, he is the only one who knew me, the real me, because we met when I was so young. I mean, there
Yep.
were just little things about me he would know, and my daughter carries a lot of those things from him. Like, my daughter's very detail oriented when it comes to me. Like, when she buys me gifts, she puts so much thought into it, and that's how he was.
Hmm.
As a boyfriend, he, during our good times, he was always thinking of me, always giving me little gifts, whether it was like my favorite candy or Coca-Cola, because I love Coca-Cola. He was the only man that really knew me and would always give me little surprises, even though they weren't worth a lot of money, but that's not what matters. It's the thought. But,
Hmm.
and I've never said this out loud, I've never told anyone, but he's the only man who really knew me and knew my heart.
Wow.
So when I got the word that he had passed away suddenly, and actually, we were there when he passed away. We had first gotten the call that he was in cardiac arrest. We didn't know what had happened, but we went to the hospital. He had already passed, but they didn't tell us yet. But when my daughter and I got there and we found out, I mean, seeing my daughter break down,
Yeah.
it still affects her. It affects me a lot because, like I said, we weren't together, but that was a part of my past. That's my daughter's father. So now I have
Yep.
to live and see her struggle without a parent. Um,
Yeah.
so that was so difficult. And I think about it now and I'm like, life, and that's another thing. Life is so short, guys. Like,
Hmm.
we can't hate people forever. We can't hold on to grudges. We cannot do that, because when something like this happens, then you're left like, what if, what should I've done? What could I
Yeah,
have
and
done?
your
And
world changes, and especially again,
exactly.
how we're talking about with children. And even when I found out that news, when you told me, like I,
Hmm.
I still have no words about that.
Right. And
So, do you
luckily,
think that you
uh-huh.
guys, I'd say, to his last breath, did you guys end on good terms, or is there anything that you still feel like you hold on to that it's like, man, I
um,
wish I could have said X, Y, Z?
I would actually say it was on good terms, because the last time I had spoke to him before then, or last time I had actually saw him and had a conversation, was actually at my dad's funeral. When my
Oh
dad passed
wow.
away, he had reached out to me and he's like, do you mind if I go to the wake and to
Mm-hmm.
the funeral? I'm like, of course. So he went to the not the funeral, the wake.
Okay.
And I remember we spoke for a little bit, and he was telling me how much of a good dad my dad was, and how he, if he's half the man that my dad was, he's done his job as a parent. And we laughed for a little bit, and we were on good terms, as far as that. We were not down each other's throat like we had been before. And
Right.
that gives me so much peace to know that my last conversation with him was never an argument. It was never nothing negative. It was actually about life and my dad's passing. So it's pretty ironic that that was our last
Right.
conversation. And then last time I saw him was when he passed away. So it's still it just happened last year, so I'm still dealing with it. I'm
Of
still,
course.
I have a lot of questions in my head about a lot of things, like would things have been different if XYZ, so those are things I think about. And it's also staying on top of my daughter, making sure she's okay, because this is difficult for her. I know what it's like to lose a dad. And I was in my 30s. My daughter lost her dad, and she's only 20, and she was 19 when he passed. So
Well, that's kind of when you learn the true meaning of heartbreak, is when you lose somebody entirely out of this world. And like you were saying, it's just appreciate everything. And I always preach, time is all we have in this life. So enjoy it for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. It's way too short. I tell people when they're arguing, I understand, there's heated moments and arguments in your relationship, but try not to be so bitter where you're just being evil to each other, And I know that's easier said than done, because when you're going through a divorce or a breakup, especially depending on the circumstance, like if someone cheats on you, you're angry. You're like, oh, I wish you all the worst, blah, blah, blah. But you have to kind of take a step back and say, we are all humans, that we fuck up, excuse my language, but we just fuck up at times. And we have to take that into consideration and think, okay, we all mess up. Let's still not be evil. Like, I'm just so big on, I see people going at it, and I'm like, it should not be that bad. It shouldn't be that bad. It's too short of a life.
I do have a question for you.
Oh, yeah.
So you had said that he was the only one that really knew you, and, from your youth as well. And a lot of times what that tells me is that you were in love and open and all that fun stuff, because you're young and you're innocent and you don't have those guards up yet. Do you feel like after you guys broke up, with how close you had gotten to and how you felt and the trust that you gave him, have you held on to those walls in the later relationships that didn't even allow somebody else to get as close to you and to learn you on that level?
I've always come to my relationships with openness and trust. Like, they say you have to earn trust. I've been opposite, where I give people my trust, and then once they give me a reason to not trust them, then I take it back. But I always give everyone like a clean slate. Even with him, because the way we broke up was, he was young, so he cheated on me. That's what happens when you're young. And I was so upset, and I left him and I moved on. But even with that, I never, every relationship I've been in, I've always come into open. It's been disappointing. And again, it's something I'm saying a lot for the first time, that even these grown men never got a chance to really know me the way he did. I don't know how that happened. Was it because we were so young? Or maybe just some people really take that time to know you. Because like I said, my daughter gets it from him. Her attention to detail when it comes to other people, she learns them, every little piece of them, what they know, what they like, what they don't like. And that's how her dad was with me. He knew everything I liked and didn't like, from food to situations to movies. I mean, anything.
Definitely food. He was always looking.
And I still like to eat. But with that being said, I feel like, and maybe you guys can relate, there are pieces of each relationship that I've held on to, is like, wow, I'll never find someone else to do this or someone else to do that. Like with my daughter's father, I don't think I'll ever find a man, and I could be wrong, that'll actually want to get to know me in the way that he got to know me.
I think that statement right there is holding yourself back, because you're already putting out in the universe that
true.
You'll never. So yes, you will, but you have to be open enough to receive that. So it's like, I feel like what Sophie's asking you is, it's like, maybe without even knowing it, you're blocking yourself.
Maybe I am. So I'm putting the trust out there, but you're right. Maybe I am blocking certain. And you know what? You're absolutely right. Damn, you guys just put me out there, but I like it.
Hey, this is about being better and growing,
Yes, and having that self-awareness, because I think I have it. But clearly, look, you guys had to be like, nah, chick, hold up a second.
It's just a different perspective and a different view from being out of Baltimore. But it's just sometimes you don't realize that you're still carrying on the past with you, even when you think you moved on, but saying, oh, I'll never meet somebody like XYZ. Yes, you will. You'll meet somebody better and then some. But you can't do that until you are open to receive that and receive that energy. And Sophie knows and can tell you all about receiving energy 1,000 times over. But in relationships, if you keep holding on to the same demeanor, you're not going to move forward and you're not going to get what you want.
And you know how when you go through a breakup, you think, I'm never going to find love again. And then you end up finding something 10 times more better. And then you think back, like, man, I was really crying over this person. I was losing
Oh my
sleep over
gosh.
him.
Sleep, wait, like
I know you don't, I can't eat
time.
when I'm stressed. You know, through breakups, I get so skinny. I'm like, but you're right. Then we're like, wait a second. And then you find someone else. You're like, oh, okay.
Bing. Yeah, that's we were saying last week, Sophie. It's like, well, now we're both married, and who would have thunk? So, like,
Holy smokes.
the queen of breakups. And after the last one, it's like 2-year break, and I'm like, I'm good. I don't want another guy forever. Like, I could be single.
And look at
forever.
where you're at.
Crazy of all
But
people.
I love it. I do love it. Like, you have an amazing husband.
Thank you.
You know, from this person who was used to being single, doing her own thing, and now she has this amazing son and husband. And I think it's wonderful. And, you know, I applaud you women for that, because I think now so many women don't want it. Like, they're like, well, I don't need a man. I don't need a man. And that's fine. You may not need a man, but it's okay to be open and want to be vulnerable enough to put yourself in a relationship. And listen, because I'm hopeful. I'm going to get me a husband. At some point when the time is right, God's going to have that man for me.
Exactly. And that's what it is. It's all about timing. And I don't believe in the words of saying, like, I don't need a man. I don't need a man. Like, I don't need anybody because I can do anything, blah, blah, blah. But it's just like a partnership is, a partnership is completely different from expectations of needing somebody. It's a balance.
And also, right. And as you get older, you get more mature and realize things. Like, I was just telling someone recently, back like 10, 15 years ago, I would have said, I'm gonna wear what I want. I don't care what my man thinks. He's not gonna tell me what to wear. But now I'm like, no, you know, when I'm in a relationship, if there's something that makes him uncomfortable, and it's not that he's insecure, but think about it. If I'm wearing something super revealing and it's gonna bring attention from other men, it's gonna put him in a situation. Now I'm at that point where I'm like mature enough to be like, no, it's okay. I can wear something a little more toned down, so that we're all happy. You know what I mean? But
and you just want to be respectful for your relationship.
Exactly.
I think that's what it boils down to.
Yeah, respect each other, you know each other and respect each other. It's
I'll still wear my booty shorts.
Of course. And that's fine.
Oh, we know you will, Jamie.
Every relationship is different, and what works for some doesn't work for others, and that's fine. You wear your booty shorts because you look good in them, and I know your husband loves them too.
But I will still be respect. It's time and a place, right? So it's like, if I know that we're going to be somewhere that, or for his business or something like that, obviously I'm going to get it together. But if it's Jamie time, I'm going to do what I
want. You're so cute.
Absolutely. No, but that's actually the beauty behind breakups that I think a lot of us fail to remember in the moment, at least in the moment, that it allows you to learn yourself and grow, which then automatically makes you a better person, which also makes you a different person than who you just were. So like, even with you, you know, Nunu, you've got all this turmoil that's happened that you've been working through and doing obviously a wonderful job. There's a lot of people who have a harder time, and you're killing it, woman. But
even if you don't think you are, you are. Like,
you are.
It's hard. It's hard.
I appreciate
you
that.
have a lot on your back. But wow, ladies, that was intense. So one, I do realize, to wrap this up, Nunu, that you said that you are starting your journey of becoming an amazing author. Do you want to share with us what your book is going to be about?
Absolutely. So the book I'm working on is on co-parenting relationships.
Ooh.
I'm no expert, but what I'm putting in the book is what I have learned along the way. There's things, that I know I went wrong in, and things I know I went right in, and things that, my kids' fathers, like my son and my daughter's father, stuff that they did that was great, maybe not so great. So the book is not a bashing other parents book. It's more of a guide, like how to get through those challenging moments when you're co-parenting, from, who the kid is going to be with and how to overcome certain obstacles. Because as we all know, parenting is tough. And when you're trying to do it in two separate households, it's even tougher. So this book is just pretty much what I've learned along the way, and sharing tips to others how to navigate through that complex, super difficult aspect of life of raising a child together. So I'm hoping that I can help other parents, who go through similar things and work through it.
I
If there's
love
things,
that.
thank you. I mean,
Yes.
there's a lot of stuff
And
I could have changed in the past, but here I go.
But you
your
learned from
efforts
it, and
are
now you're writing
needed.
a book. That is exciting.
Thank you, ladies. Thank you. I
Yeah,
Please let
appreciate it.
us know when that drops. And for everybody out there, don't forget to subscribe to us, Heartbreak Healed. Please find out. We will keep you updated when Miss Nunu writes her co-parenting book, because clearly she has the expertise in that regard. So
Far from perfect, but
yes, exactly. Thank you for joining us today, and we will
thank you,
see you
ladies.
guys next week.